All those pet food bags out there, there's a best by date. And when you look at, your milk or whatever for human food, you've got a best by date or sell by date that's on there. In pet food, it's determined experimentally, of course, but that duration of how long that shelf life may be on that bag is determined by the supply chain of that diet. So where it's made, the ingredients that are in it, and then that pet food company's supply chain and out there. So
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, where we seek to discuss the science behind pet food and pet nutrition by speaking with experts in the field, making knowledge accessible to all. I'm your host, Julia Pezzali, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Sara Cutler about shelf life of pet food products. Welcome to our podcast, Sara.
Hi, nice to be here.
And before we talk about shelf life, and you have a lot of experience on the topic to share with our audience, do you mind explaining a little bit about your background and the path that led you to your current position?
Yeah, back when I was in undergraduate studies, I did not know that there was a career in pet food. So I kind of took a different path to get here, I guess. Obviously, I've always had cats and dogs and pets, and I grew up on a farm, so I was always interested in what they were eating. I went to undergrad at South Dakota State, where I have an animal science degree. And then after a little bit of time in animal health industry, I went back to graduate school at Iowa State. And there again, swine nutrition, it's Iowa State, so we did a lot of pig projects. I always joke that I've been trying to kill salmonella for over 20 years. Definitely the case because I have a microbiology master's degree, and my project for my Ph.D. was actually trying to eliminate E. coli from swine, so from post-weaning swine. So a lot of microbiology in there. I got to Kemin. I was very lucky to get an opportunity at Kemin in pet food. I believe the interview question was, how do you feel about pet food? And I'm like, I'm very interested because I have cats and dogs, and I've always been interested in how we come up with product formats and developing things. And, Kemin has kept me busy now for the last 17 years. We've been trying to keep up with all of the innovations that are out there in the pet food industry, and the industry's been great. Keeps moving, keeps changing, and that's really great for somebody like me. And I've stuck around for 17 years because it has kept me engaged and interested.
Yeah, I bet there is a new challenge every day, and the industry moves so in a very fast pace, so it's never boring for sure to be involved in a job in the pet food industry.
Absolutely.
And very nice to hear as well different backgrounds and how people end up within the pet food industry and all those disciplines. Swine, meat science, microbiology, they're all part of the pet food science itself. So there is different ways to get where within the industry, and that is always, at least for me, very fascinating to see how people find their way here.
Yeah, there was no companion animal nutrition program. That was, we were all of a certain, generation. We're all swine nutrition or monogastric nutritionists. So it's very interesting now and exciting to see that there are programs related to companion animal now.
We definitely got more attention now in pet food, companion animal nutrition, and hopefully we can spread them more across the U.S. and the globe.
Kemin Nutrisurance is compelled to provide safe and delicious ingredients to improve our pets' food so they can have the best quality of life. Every day, they deliver specialized expertise, innovative products, and unrivaled support through the pet food and rendering value chain. From oxidation control and food safety to palatability and nutrition, all the way through a suite of tailored services that support you from start to finish, we ensure you're getting the most from Kemin ingredients. Kemin is compelled by curiosity to ensure pets around the world are living happy and healthy lives.
Yeah, but let's talk a little bit more about shelf life and pet food, and we'd love to learn more about your experience in this topic. And when I talk with experts, I always like to start with a very simple question because sometimes you forget the simple and go into the complicated things. And to start, what is shelf life of a product and how it can be determined?
Yeah, so everybody and all those pet food bags out there, there's a best by date. And when you look at, your milk or whatever for human food, you've got a best by date or sell by date that's on there. In pet food, it's determined experimentally, of course, but that duration of how long that shelf life may be on that bag is determined by the supply chain of that diet. So where it's made, the ingredients that are in it, and then that pet food company's supply chain and out there. So obviously some of these bigger companies, they have a very established supply chain. They're proficient at using ingredients very quickly. Their formulas are, identical at every place that they make it. We determine that shelf life, and it's anywhere from 12 months to 18 months. And sometimes we are even asked for 24 months, or again, depending on product format, if it's a freeze-dried thing, that best by date or that shelf life can actually be quite lengthy because it's freeze-dried. I know there's not a lot of reactions going on there, and it's actually very stable for a long time. But how we establish shelf life experimentally is we can test that diet either in the bag that it comes in, which usually there's not a lot going on if you just test something in a bag and you keep it in the bag. In the lab, we actually test more of a worst case scenario. So what we'll do is we'll actually take that diet, put it in like a Ziploc type of bag, put it in an incubator and actually accelerate those shelf life reactions, or kind of a worst case scenario. Or sometimes we'll partner with customers on their packaging and store in packaging as well, just to determine if there's any changes in there. And then we're looking at sensory attributes. So what that diet smells like is most important to the animal. We want to make sure that that diet smells and in some cases looks the same as when it was manufactured. And definitely want to make sure that that nutritional value is still there for that animal. So if the diet is 6 months, a year, 18 months old, we want to make sure that that animal is getting the nutrition that it was formulated to get from that diet, because that is that animal's sole source of nutrition, unlike you and me, or we have the ability to choose what we're going to eat. And I know pets particularly get treats and snacks and that sort of thing too, but we do need to make sure that their diet meets their nutritional needs, and that's by preventing oxidation in those fat ingredients and making sure that things like vitamins and those things are still present in that diet even after it's aged.
About those shelf lives, the accelerated ones that you're going to put in the bag and challenge the product a little bit. You mentioned some sensory attributes, some measuring vitamin losses or some nutrient losses. What are some standard outcomes or markers that people or the industry use the most to have a more quantitative way to determine the shelf life?
Yeah, from a lipid oxidation perspective, where we're looking at making sure that those fats that are in those diets are not degraded, we measure things like peroxide value, which is a preliminary indicator of oxidation. So what a peroxide value says is that there's a reaction occurring in that fat that is causing the peroxide values to accumulate. And then after the peroxide values begin to increase, we'll measure things called aldehydes, which are the outcome of lipid oxidation. In my lab, we measure hexanol and decadienol, but out in the industry, you will see other things like anisotine or Totox type of analysis, and these are measuring that aroma of oxidation. So that animal, particularly if you're a cat, you're going to want to have that diet be very consistent and that there's not any off aromas. We also do measure other things as simple as, does it mold? I mean, that's important as well. We want to make sure that there's not any kind of microbial growth in terms of yeast and mold on that, because that changes the physical appearance, as well as it's probably not so tasty to eat those either. We will look at physical color as well. So oxidation can result in different colors being formed, or a color fade, or like a graying or kind of orange kind of color that can result as well. And then, of course, we're going to look at things like other aromas. So like if there's any kind of microbial degradation of ingredients that go into that diet, you can have an off aroma from that as well. So we spend a lot of time talking about aromas. So trying to identify aromas, and we can actually quantify those aromas in our lab as well. Even if they aren't from lipid oxidation, we do make sure that the diet is free of any other kind of aroma that can be out there as well. It's not always lipid oxidation. We're a lot concerned with that because we support the sale of antioxidants. So we want to make sure that our preservatives are working in that system, but we also want to make sure that the ingredients are free of other off aromas as well.
And that's going to impact the palatability of the product, acceptability by the animal. So very important to understand that.
And sometimes it's not so easy tracking down, what those aromas are. And I'll just throw in that sometimes if it smells a little bit off to you and me, that might not translate to an issue with a dog or a cat. Particularly a dog might be interested in a certain amount of free fatty acids, or as we call it, just a certain funk. Dogs are comfortable with that to a certain extent. So there might be levels at which are acceptable, but then above which are not acceptable to the animal.
And both are important because the owner is the one purchasing the food. If it opens the bag and it doesn't like the smell, at least I don't buy that again because I don't want my kitchen to stink some weird pet food smell. But
right, especially marine materials. So like if it's a heavily fish diet, a cat might actually enjoy that aroma if it's a good aroma to them. But if it's something that is not so much, or especially if it's a treat and you hand it to your animal and you smell that, and that smell is in your environment, then we really need to make sure that we're controlling this. And there are sensory panels for humans to evaluate the aromas of diets and treats that are given to cats and dogs as well, because that part's important as well. Particularly in other regions, we hear sometimes reports that there are aromas added to cat and dog diets and treats that are appealing to the human. I mean, there's a reason why we make little, fish-shaped cat food and those sorts of things. That is not for the dog and the cat. That's for us. I mean, it needs to be appealing to the people who are paying money for it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Have to make sure both are happy. The person with the purchasing decision, and then the animal actually consuming that, or the product intended for that species.
Yeah, and if you have a negative experience, and we always discuss this with our customers too, you're likely to tell someone else, right? So if you buy something that you're displeased with, you might lose some brand loyalty as a result of that. So we want to make sure that the product that our customers are making is very consistent and appealing to not only the pet, because if a pet rejects that diet, if we put it down in that feeding bowl and they walk away, that's disappointing, right? And then you think, oh no, I made a mistake, or you might even take it kind of personally that animal rejects that diet. And then you want to know why, of course. You want to not make that mistake again. And want to make sure that you don't have an unhappy customer online or telling their friends, my goodness, I paid all this money for this really expensive dog food and my dog will not go near it. What is up with that? We want to try to prevent that.
Yeah, and food is connection, right? Is a way for pet owners to connect with their pets. Providing food is that experience that you're doing something good for them. So you want to make sure they're enjoying their meal as much as you enjoy your meal when you eat. So it's a lot of psychology behind it as well, human-animal bond.
And we have done studies where we quantify, that feeding experience. So how the animal feels about what we're feeding them. And I know my animals strictly enforce a feeding time. You know that they're looking forward to this, and you put it in front of them, and you do want them to be impressed with that you made a good decision for them. I think, and then they won't come back at you a little while later and ask for something else, or you feel like you need to have the option for them that they want. And like I mentioned, it is their sole source of nutrition. So if you're feeding a pet food kibble, that is their diet. It's not like they could say, you know what, I don't feel like this today, or maybe I didn't get everything I need here. And then spoilage and these sorts of things, extensive amounts of microbial spoilage or oxidation can have negative impacts on the animal itself. We want to make sure that nutrition there, we want to make sure that things aren't spoiled from a microbial perspective or oxidation, because as we all know, we don't want any accidents or other things in the house. We don't want to make that animal sick. So we want to make sure that everything is in good condition when we make those diets too.
And it seems that shelf life is a big part of ensuring that the safety of the product. So why is it important to conduct shelf life studies? It's the nutrition, that safety aspect, consumer. Is there anything you want to highlight or summarize about why companies should consider doing shelf life studies to validate their products?
Yeah, I think it's important from a perspective of as your markets change as well. So if you have a domestic market and you begin as a small company and you're selling your products locally, and perhaps your shelf life doesn't need to be as long, but it helps to have that information if your company expands or if your market changes. So we've seen a lot of push in, certainly the last few years, on e-commerce. So that diet that's purchased online, we want to make sure that diet is in good condition when it gets to the customer, for other regions as well. So most pet food companies are making something that is exported. And for export, we want to make sure that if it takes 6 months in a shipping container for a diet to get somewhere, its shelf life is really starting at 6 months of age when it gets to its destination. And if that climate is particularly hot, for example, or if the storage is particularly long, then you want to make sure that when the consumer, that end user, opens that bag, that it smells like what it's supposed to smell like. And if you find out down the road that, well, I didn't add enough or an appropriate amount or appropriate type of antioxidant, you don't want to find that out after that diet has been exported elsewhere or after that diet is out on the shelf somewhere. Sometimes we'll see challenges with ingredients used that don't result in an oxidation challenge until a few months down the line. So, for example, if you're using an ingredient that has some oxidation issues, let's say like a high PV, and you formulate that in, that might not be something that you're going to see immediately. So if you just test that diet when you make it, that's not a fair depiction of what it's going to be a few months down the road. So you need to do that shelf life study to know, okay, here's what it looks like when you manufacture it. Here's my level of antioxidant, and then how quickly that diet uses it. So when that diet's 6 months old, that it's not out of antioxidant, or even worse, the antioxidant that you use is not being used in response to oxidation, and you're wasting your money. Either you're using the wrong product at the wrong rate, or it's added at an inappropriate time, too late to prevent oxidation. So then, you're doing the right things, but it's not getting you what you need. And that's really how we evaluate our product use during a shelf life study. Is we evaluate at time intervals the antioxidant residual level, the extent of oxidation, and then as that oxidation or as that PV starts to increase, the extent of the aroma of oxidation that's in there. And we do other things along the way as well. So we want to make sure that diet's moisture level is appropriate to make a shelf life, especially if it's going to be in a condition that's summer, high humidity, for example. So if a product is held at a high humidity condition before it's packaged, that can be an issue with mold or things like that as well. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's very customer specific. And that's why we enjoy the challenge of doing these shelf life tests. We've had the opportunity to look at a lot of data over many years, and sometimes we can tell within the first couple of study polls what's going to happen here, and then have a plan for what we would like to do to improve that diet.
Oh, very, very cool. And you mentioned about antioxidant. I think that's a way to try to protect the diet on that oxidation. It's hard to stop it, but also to not let it scale up to a big level. And you also mentioned, Sarah, about challenges and different formats of pet food. We have seen over the years is not only kibble and wet pet food anymore, the canned diets. There are so many different formats. Is the same shelf life testing used for different formats of pet food, or how do you take these different formats of pet food when customers come to you? How do you approach that?
I did want to mention, before I get into the other types, that once oxidation begins to occur, you can't back it up. So that's the other thing that's important, is we want to make sure that we prevent those oxidation reactions from beginning at all. Once those oxidation reactions start going, they're not reversible. So if you did not get your antioxidant in at the appropriate time, it's not going to be able to quench those reactions. And that's why sometimes we'll see a high PV and a high antioxidant level, because we simply didn't get the antioxidant in a position where it could do something about the oxidation. As far as other formats, 17 years ago, when I started doing this, we really concentrated mostly on kibble, because most diets were kibble at that point. And then recipes got more complicated. So it was all chicken and corn. Everything that was popular was very similar, chicken, corn, chicken fat, chicken enrobing fat. We were not seeing high meat type of diets. That has definitely been the trend over the past 10 years. We definitely at that time did not see things like vegetable oils and those sorts of things. And of course, we mirror humanization. So as trends come and go with human nutrition, we see more complicated, either very complicated or very limited ingredient diets. So there's very little kind of in between, but everything that is out there, we've had experience with. And it's been an interesting challenge trying to deal with those ingredients being differing. Even amongst the same pet food company, they can have quite the variety of product recipes in there. And it's interesting for us as a consumer because we can try different things, but it can be challenging for us from a shelf life perspective. As far as, other kind of new, cool, awesome things, fresh and frozen is very interesting. Certainly, if you spend any time online, you're going to see some ads for fresh and frozen. Very interesting shelf life challenge for those diets, but very doable from a shelf life perspective. Those diets can go through a supply chain of being made, then frozen, and then either custom sent to someone's house. So like if you've got a mail delivery, meal service type of thing, or they can be sold over e-commerce, or they can be in a cooler at the grocery store. So for all of those things, we don't see a lot of challenge from an oxidation perspective, unless there's some temperature abuse where you've got freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. That's usually a very good way to promote oxidation in things. In something like a fresh frozen diet where they have a very high water activity, their water activity is 0.9 and above, that's where micro likes to grow. So there are bacteria that grow at refrigerated temperature. That's why you can't keep ground meat in your refrigerator forever, because there are bacteria that like to grow and do grow at refrigerated temperature. So for those sorts of diets, really for shelf life, we want to prevent the package bloating type of bacteria. So your lactobacillus type of species, your psychotropes that grow at refrigerated temperature, because that's when you'll result in that bloated bag that's sitting in the cooler. And you definitely don't want any kind of food safety or foodborne illness related bacteria in those diets, because they can be in your refrigerator. So you don't want that cross contamination between human food and your food, particularly if you open that package and your dog eats part of it and then you put the rest of it back in the fridge. So we've been asked over the years to mimic those conditions for our customers to get the most information we can for them, to be able to prevent all of those things that may occur during their supply chain. So been very interesting, and I feel like we have very good solutions for all of those conditions. But yeah, in the beginning, we had to reevaluate how we do shelf life because kibble is kibble. It's dry. You can accelerate those reactions up to a certain point, and you can see the reactions that you're going to see, in the bag as it goes through transit and that sort of thing. But fresh and frozen is a very different approach. When we're talking about things in a can, so your traditional wet pet food that's in a can or a pouch or a tray or all of the cool things that those products are put into now so you can actually see it, it does become important again to make sure that if you're using a package where it may be a little bit breathable, you can see some oxidation in that wet pet. You can see also, again, depending on how breathable, you could see a little bit of mold in there as well if it's transmissible enough. This would occur more often if a consumer used part of a pouch or that sort of thing. And again, that situation where you put it in the refrigerator, you try to keep it a little bit longer, that's where you could see the mold. Temperature changes, you can have oxidation there. But retorted things, for the most part, as they're sterilized, are very stable in that package. You can see some oxidation or particularly off aromas that come from the quality of those ingredients that go into those. So when we're talking about meat slurry or meats in general, organ meats, those sorts of things that go into pouch diets, canned diets, those sorts of things, any kind of off aroma that you're going to get in there is most likely the result of microbial degradation of those ingredients. And that's where it becomes important that those ingredients are in good condition. And then as you grind them, as you bring them all together, that if that's held at a higher temperature for a duration, that there's not any kind of microbial growth that's going on in there, because that will result in off aromas, things called like biogenic amines. And again, that's probably what that palatability challenges are related to for a retorted or that sort of canned diet, because for the most part, for those wet type of diets, we're dealing with cats again, and cats don't like any kind of change, and they don't like, in particular, biogenic amines or free fatty acids or those sorts of things in that environment. And again, it hurts you because they reject what you give them, and we want to try to eliminate that as much as possible so you don't just end up throwing it away.
And you mentioned as well about those fresh diets that are going to be in the refrigerator at home at the consumer, and shelf life doesn't stop where it only stops when the bag is over, right? So the consumer as well, they have a part of maintaining their shelf life. So sometimes companies, they do their best. They work with technical services to get the best antioxidant, the right level, and then they don't store the diet properly at home. And then
you get a good deal, right? You get that big bag that's on sale, and then you're keeping that in your laundry room. Like I've done this personally, where I have bought the really big bag of treats and then kept it right over my washing machine, and then it's accumulating moisture as it's doing that. And I know better, but that's where the stuff goes, right? But as you're storing that product in your house, or your consumer is, and that bag's open, that is why when we do shelf life studies, or even when we do mold challenge studies, we make sure that it is absolutely the worst condition. Like, this is the worst case scenario. So we'll store that diet, instead of in that lovely barrier bag, we'll store it in a Ziploc bag that can breathe. So even if your customer is leaving that diet even in an open Tupperware container or in a bag, or just leaving it open, that diet will be able to endure that condition.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because it's hard to control what happens at the consumer end. So with ensuring that we are evaluating all those aspects, it's very, very important.
Yeah, and you'll see this sometimes, in online reviews, that the diet was fine when I bought it. And then as you get down to the bottom of the bag, the dog doesn't like it anymore. Well, yes, because the flavor profile is changing as you go down that bag, and it's probably that that diet oxidizing as it sits there. But yeah, it still is disappointing. If you get to the end of the bag and the dog won't eat it anymore, then you're like, oh no.
Yeah, still part of that whole experience that pet food brings too.
Yeah, and we may or may not be able to detect that aroma. I'll just shout out to my lab. My lab, I think, is very calibrated to oxidation aromas. So, when they smell samples, they will know, okay, is this oxidized or is this some other sort of aromatic compound that may or may not be related to oxidation. But over the years, we've gone through a lot of testing to determine what it is that we look at and its relevance to cats and dogs and palatability.
Awesome. And you mentioned, Sarah, as well, like challenges with like new formats coming up. So do you want to share maybe some, one of the biggest challenges today with shelf life or that you may be experiencing now?
Yeah, our challenges with shelf life are usually related to changes in supply chain or trends or these sorts of things. So we've seen a shift toward that kind of super premium type of diet to more of a premium sort of diet. Those sorts of diets, for the most part, are very stable. The customers do a very good job of treating them. When formulators are forced to make changes in ingredients, that's where things can get kind of interesting. So if, for example, you're switching from one fat source to another fat source, you can definitely see changes in oxidation. If you're switching from one kind of fish oil to another kind of fish oil, that can very much change the oxidation profile of your diet. Same for ingredients. So if you're buying in bulk, I'll use that another example, your protein ingredients, for example, and you're either storing that slurry in the freezer for an extended amount of time, it could be oxidized by the time you make it. So even if you're making the same diet, but you're using the same ingredient that has been sitting for a long time, that's going to change the flavor profile of that diet over time. As that ingredient oxidizes, then you use it. So even if it's the exact same recipe, if the ingredient quality changes. Diets in general oxidize very differently, even the same diet, if you coat it with different enrobing fat. So if you use different types of sunflower oil, high linoleic sunflower oil, or things like flaxseed oil, oxidize more rapidly than things like canola oil, or chicken fat is a traditional example. But even chicken fat sources, depending on the fatty acid profile of that fat as a result of what that bird ate during its life, that'll change the fatty acid profile of that chicken fat and change its oxidation rate. So we do a tremendous amount of testing, and all of those are not challenges that are impossible to overcome. You just have to look at it eyes wide open as you change these sources, just to know, do I need a slightly different antioxidant blend? Do I need to talk to my supplier about adding the antioxidant at a different point in the process? Have I noticed any changes in the shelf life of my diet since I made this change? And we're certainly there for you to evaluate any impact in there. Same thing goes for if you change, where you're marketing your diet. If you're changing from a local supply chain to you're going to sell these all around the world, that does make a difference in what we looked at. Because if we want to know if there's a difference between 12 months and 18 months of shelf life, you're certainly going to need to know that, because you don't want to have your product unappealing, certainly out in the market.
For sure, not a one-size-fit-all solution. Really understanding your formula, your raw ingredients, how they're being raw material, how they're being treated, and where you're gonna sell it, your supply chain, and all of that. So.
Yeah, and we do a tremendous amount of ingredient testing for that reason, because we want to make sure that the ingredient suppliers, they want to know if their ingredients are consistent over time as well, because they don't want to sell something that is a challenge in the final diet. And if you're making pet food every day with the same recipe, you want it to be the same every day. You don't want any kind of surprises coming in your ingredients, and the ingredient suppliers don't want to provide any surprises either.
It's time for our famous 3.
Last question, Sarah, before we talk about some our final ones, more not related specifically to shelf life. Do you want to share maybe some innovations or trends emerging in shelf life testing or overall shelf life for pet food? Is there anything new happening that exciting that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I guess some of the more interesting things would be, sustainability is a really big deal. So we've had some conversations about, we went from pet food bags that were just kind of a bag and bag or a paper bag sort of thing to very kind of high end barrier sorts of things to now sustainable bags, recyclable bags. Those sorts of things can have an impact on diet shelf life. Again, this is why we try to formulate for worst case scenario. We like to think that no matter how you package those diets, we can make sure that we've got the right kind of antioxidant in there to prevent any kind of oxidation. And then, the fun things for me are always things like treats where it gets more and more creative. There are some really cool products that are out there that are combining treats and diets as well. So we're seeing more of a push toward, okay, this is my recipe, but including freeze-dried parts or bits into that recipe. And of course, freeze-dried materials are very palatable. Cats love that very dry, very flavorful ingredient in there. But that's certainly an innovation where we're combining product types. I realize that things like kibbles and bits have been around forever. We've always kind of loved the novel shapes and inclusions and those sorts of things, but the colors aren't so much in favor now, but the format mixing is very interesting. Very interesting innovations in fresh and frozen. I mean, there are fresh and frozen treats now. There are lots of interesting things that you can buy that would mimic a human diet. So certainly humanization from the perspective of my dog's diet matches my diet. Those are always very interesting in matching trends. So we always enjoy this. Novel ingredients, we always enjoy, different and interesting approaches to things, particularly if we look at sustainability of ingredients, being able to use new things that, traditionally pet food is eating leftovers of ours, and it still is in a lot of ways. So being able to use ingredients from the human supply chain that we're not eating. So being sustainable and green to make sure that we use these ingredients instead of disposing of them.
And I bet there are going to be more and more things to work on with the always different marketing trends, innovations going on in the pet food industry. Novel ingredients are going to be a part of the innovation and new format. So most exciting to see how that evolves. And you as well, I'm sure, like what are different challenges and things they're going to encounter and solutions that
you can just buy just about anything freeze-dried now, which is amazing to me. The treat innovation around that space has been very cool, and they're very palatable, and that's fun. It's very interesting stuff.
And a lot of the supplements now, rising in the market.
Yes.
Supplements
Everything.
are different formats, everything, and
yep.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us today. It was great to talk with you and to learn a little bit more about shelf life. And I'm sure we'll love to have you back here to explore more about those specific formats and learn more from you. So thank you very much. But before I let you go, I have one last question for you related to your experience in the pet food industry. You mentioned that you have been working with Kemin for many years, and I think it's an exciting job, at least because you're still there. So maybe what is the most rewarding part of your job and also the rewarding part of being involved in the pet food industry?
I think that, in general, we all have a bit of levity about what we do as well, because I like it that my job is not entirely serious, right? So there's only so serious you can be when you're talking about trying to make a cat happy, for example. I love it that nobody minds when I have a Teams call and my cat walks across the desk. Everybody's interested in my cat's thoughts. They're not looking at that, as unserious. We spend a tremendous amount of time talking about our dogs and our pets on calls, which I appreciate very much because that is our career too. So how great is it that we can talk about something as silly as, cat treats sometimes, and, our animal behavior during a call. So I appreciate that a lot. I get to work with a lot of very creative people in product development, and that's always fun because we're always interested in the next best thing. We're always interested in trends that are out there. And I think as pet food people, as well as creative people, we're always interested in discussing these things. So I think that I've got a really interesting, very cool job, and I appreciate all the opportunity to talk to all the other like-minded people out there.
Yeah, that sounds really fun, and I do appreciate as well the dog and cat part, and we do things for them as well. The end goal, so it's nice that you're in a environment that people love pets as well, or most people, and then we can share about our pet family members.
Yeah, no pretenses and no other motivations. I mean, we are trying to make them happy, and again, we get to get their thoughts right on what I get to do every day. You don't always get to have direct feedback on what you're working on, and with cats and dogs, you definitely do. And there's no filter. They're not going to spare your feelings, and it's always interesting. Sometimes it hurts. You really want them to like what you did or what you're working on. And sometimes they're just, that's part of it.
Honest feedback from them always.
Yep.
So that's good. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, again for joining us, and we hope to talk with you next time again.
Sure. Thank you.